This is the Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lemaster, and we are here for episode number 99. We are getting really close to that 100 mark with very special guest, Dr. Jen Currin-McCulloch. How are you today?
I'm well, Shane. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm really enjoying the lull in the extremely hot weather we've been having for the last couple of weeks. I can't stand really anything over 85, so I'm enjoying these days of 70-degree weather.
Yeah, 102 is a bit much for me as well.
Yeah, that was brutal. I mean, it just totally like zaps my energy and motivation to really do anything.
Yes.
So the first question is the only standardized question that I ask all my guests, and that is that the podcast is called Conversations with the Mind. And I'm wondering, when you hear that phrase, Conversations with the Mind, what thoughts come up for you? What thoughts or imagery or what meaning comes up for you when you hear Conversations with the Mind?
I guess for me, the first word that comes to my mind when we talk about mind, I think about body. And maybe that's because I've always worked as a health social worker. And I feel that the mind and body are interconnected so deeply. And that I've met so many people over my lifetime that I'm working in as an oncology and palliative care social worker, that their bodies may be at a state which, if you look at their CAT scans or if you look at their lab reports, that there's no way that their body can be functioning, but there's something that they're holding on to in their mind or possibly in their hearts, right? That keeps them motivated to go on. And so I see the mind is such a powerhouse. I kind of see it as stronger than maybe the physical body and guiding what we do and motivating behavior when the physical body looks like it shouldn't be able to move or do anything anymore.
So, yeah, talk to me a little bit more about how you view sort of the mind-body connection, because I know, at least in the last, 3 or 4 decades, mind-body medicine has been sort of a buzzword, where in the past people would focus mostly on, just the body or just the mind, with different specialties. But now we're starting to see that the mind and body are intimately integrated with each other. So talk to me a little bit more about your understanding of mind-body connection and how it applies to maybe mind-body medicine or practice here in I don't know, contemporary times.
Right. Um, Goodness gracious. So contemporary times, of course, everywhere we go, even the Time magazines are looking at, mindfulness and how we can use that to really center ourselves and center and relax our bodies. I think too about our bodies and like people that I've met over the course of my life, whether they're young, whether they're really old, that there's something that their mind can go to a state of despair or a state of immense depression or hopelessness. And they want to leave this world, right? They don't want to be connected to their body anymore. It could be that they're in such bad physical state or so many physical symptoms that they feel like they don't want to keep going on. And so that connection of physical suffering and mental suffering is also really important for me. And seeing that connection when one isn't going well, then the other one sort of wants to cease to exist or stops working, functioning as well. I don't know. So and I also work a lot with young adults too. And I find looking at the body in relationship to age is very different as well. So folks that have had a longer sense of connection to their body, when their body begins to function, their sense of despair is very different from somebody that is in their teens or young adults, maybe 18 to 39, that their sense of despair based on their physical function relates a lot to their social function. So maybe they haven't had a chance as well to move forward and explore some of these developmental milestones. So I see that the body connects to the mind, also society, where we are, roles in the world, and how that fits in as well. So it's maybe mind, body, and social identity as well. Hopefully, I didn't just take us on a whole different
No, that's good.
route.
No, I want to touch on the mind body here for a minute more.
Sure.
So, yeah, for me, I mean, it's interesting. I kind of see the mind body connection as, you know, almost like a highway or a super highway that moves in two directions, right? So
Mhm.
the body and the body's condition can certainly affect our mind and the quality of our thoughts. And it definitely goes the other way too, where the quality of our mind and our thoughts can impact our body. I've known people and probably experienced something like this myself, where when I'm in a depressed state, or I'm having negative thoughts about myself or about the world, like my immune system has a response where I become sick more easily.
Mhm.
I can feel it in my body, lethargy and sensitivity to things. So I see it moving sort of in this, a two-lane highway going both directions. And I definitely want to separate or distinguish between mind and brain, because I think they're two separate but joined things.
Right.
Whereas the mind happens, sort of in our thought realm, in our inner verse. The brain, is a piece of machinery that maybe makes that possible. We're not quite sure if the mind is, located in the brain, or if the brain is just maybe a receiver or some kind of transmitting device that sort of
Right.
pulls the mind out of collective consciousness and allows us to experience it that way. Um, but I also see all three of those things, brain, mind, and body, as sort of machinery in a sense, right? Where it's easy for us to think of our body system as a machine, everything working together. And when one thing is not working, the gears get clogged up, then all sorts of things can go wrong with it. Same with the
Right.
brain. The
Yeah.
brain can be a machine that way. But I also tend to view the mind similarly, that it is, it is a machine in some ways, and it's, um, I don't know, the more I explore it, it seems like it's more of like a tool that we can
Hmm.
utilize correctly or utilize incorrectly, right? Like a hammer is not good for every job, and the
Right.
mind the way we use it is not good for every job, but we can fine tune it to help us problem solve, or help us be more creative, or help us really connect with other people in that social sense. And so a lot of my interest in psychology, and through my master's program and everything in sports psychology, was really learning how to study this tool of the mind and learn how to maybe sharpen that tool, to train that tool, because I do think the mind is a trainable thing that we can,
Yes.
with certain techniques and certain experiences, we can train it to operate more efficiently for us, or more effectively for us. I know for me in my athletics and my jujitsu, I've certainly used it or trained it to work for me, where if I'm being choked by somebody, in the beginning of my jujitsu experience, the mind doesn't have that training, and so it like freaks out, and it wants to get away. But now, after 15 years of training in jujitsu, I can be getting choked by somebody, and I've trained my mind to be able to, slow itself down and figure out, like, okay, we are in trouble here, but freaking out is not going to help. So I need to slow down and step by step figure my way out of that. That's going to be the best way to move forward in this situation. And certainly through, the PhD program that I'm in right now, you all, as our professors, are teaching us also how to refine this tool that we have, this mind that we have,
Mhm.
and how to think in certain ways, and how to question our thoughts and our beliefs, and question the belief structures of society as a whole, and come at it from different angles. So I kind of see it as, all intertwined in this large system. Still not quite sure which ones maybe supersede the others. But I have a tendency to believe that the mind is much more powerful than the body is, uh,
Mhm.
just because of, I like to believe that with the mind we can, if we learn the skills, and we learn to tap into, um, maybe some of those innate qualities of the mind that may have been lost over centuries because of our modern, the way we go about our modern living, that we can, heal our bodies from within with our mind, with
Right,
visualization,
right,
something like that, and without the need of medicine.
right, right. And thinking about pain, right? How we, it's a culture of belief that we can have a quick fix for everything, and take a pill and pop it, and then everything will be fine and go away, or at least alleviate some suffering. But there's so many different things that you can do with your mind to help overcome those pain and train yourself when the pain happens, how to respond to that in a different way. Absolutely. I kind of do aim towards that. I think the mind has more power in governing what we do.
Well, even, the placebo effect has been studied
Yes.
well, and the nocebo effect, if people believe that a medication is going to work for them, then it tends to have a greater response in the body. If people tend to believe that that same medication is not going to work for them, then the medication tends to not have as prominent an effect in the body. So the mind is modulating the effects of these, even these physical substances that we take into our body that the doctor gives us. And I've read this great book. It's one of my favorite, called The Intention Experiment by Lynn McTaggart. And she has an entire chapter on spontaneous remission in terminally ill patients. And
Wow.
so I mean, and she cites tons of studies where they have these control groups. One group had, they all have terminal illness of the same type. One group is given a mindfulness intervention for 8 weeks, and encouraged to stay positive and to have positive visualizations about their disease going away. And the other is kind of left to Western medicine, standard operating protocols. And what they find is that folks in the positive mindset group tend to have much greater instances of spontaneous remission, where their disease or their cancer just vanishes, and Western doctors are like, this is impossible, I don't know how this is happening. And so that just fascinates me, that someone's own belief about themselves and belief about maybe a sickness that they've been diagnosed can greatly impact whether that continues with them or whether it goes away.
Hmm. I think in over my years, I've met one person that we had no reason to know why their tumors were smaller. Like there was nothing really that they were doing different. They weren't taking treatment. It was growing and then they stopped as a young adult. Just covered, and their vital organs, like their livers, were covered. Their liver was covered with masses, and for some reason, they just started to go away. And she was very into mindfulness. She did some yoga and was just really tried to build a life that she felt was positive for she and her family. And it was unbelievable. Like could go off. Her pain medication was on a ton of it. So there's something there. Yeah.
So you said she wasn't doing anything differently, but it does sound like she was taking maybe a different approach to being sick than others were. Like, she was still going about her life. She was focusing on health. She was
Yeah.
more geared towards, I'm gonna get as healthy as I can, versus others who might get a similar diagnosis and just sort of surrender to the fact that they're gonna die from it. And
Yes.
so from your experience with her, did you see any difference in her attitude or the difference in her positivity as compared to others?
I did, yes, absolutely, Shane. And yeah, and when she didn't do anything different in terms of like trying any radical chemotherapies or surgeries or things like that, right? But yes, she was absolutely doing something different in terms of her mindset and her positivity. And I think that she was trying not to center her life around her illness, but to center her life around positivity, to center her life around her family, and really engaged, I think, a sense of hope for her future living through and with her children, young children when she was diagnosed. And so that gave her sort of a psychological distraction as well, that she could be in there day to day and not thinking about, perseverating on something's growing inside of my body.
Mm. Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a similar story of a good family friend of ours who ended up getting stage 3 breast cancer. And all the Western doctors had told her that she had less than 6 months to live. Um, and at first, of course, I mean, it's normal. She felt despair, terrible despair and depression and hopelessness. Um, but having had sort of a bit of a spiritual background herself and not being really active in it, at that point, she decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands. She also refused chemotherapy and refused the treatments that the doctors wanted to give her. They just told her that those treatments would extend her life. They didn't necessarily say that they would cure her of her cancer, but she decided to re-engage with her spirituality, and that became the central component, the central focus in her life. And she actually had a mantra that she shared with me, a really simple mantra that she just repeated to herself constantly every single day. And it was just, she just said, I don't have cancer. I don't have cancer.
Oh, wow. Hmm.
And so she did that for a number of years and then went and got a checkup. And the doctor told her that she didn't have any cancerous cells in her body at all. Like they had just
Wow.
totally vanished. And so, I chalk that up to not only her mental power to convince herself and then convince herself on a cellular level that she doesn't have cancer and just sort of get rid of that, but also re-engagement with that higher power with a spiritual component or a
Mhm.
spiritual aspect of her life, sort of just turning things over and saying, if this is, whatever you want from me, universe, is what I'm gonna accept. And yeah, it was an amazing recovery, and the doctors just had no idea. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just like I said, this one person I met was like, I have no idea. And of course, I know a lot of people who are, staying with Western medicine and carrying on that course. That I do believe that the integrative medicine and activities that they incorporate into their healing process, I would say, extended their lives, no doubt. That they had something. Again, in my head, I keep going back to a purpose and a sense of meaning, and how that drives our behaviors. And I think it can give us a purpose and meaning and motivation to move forward, that we live longer because we want to be here to achieve these things, right? And that we feel like we are connected into this, not only our own bodies, but connected into the bigger purpose of the world and what we're giving back to society, or giving back to our smaller family or networks.
yeah. And I definitely want to dig into your past research around hope and meaning making a lot more in depth. But before we get to that, I just want to touch back on that piece about our social selves that you mentioned,
Yeah.
right? And um, being in the field of social work, a lot of our focus is on systems, which include systems of people, friends, family, employment, all the systems. And uh, what can you share with me about what you have found in what you've read and what you've experienced about the impact that our social systems have on our physical and mental health?
Right. Oh, goodness. So intimately linked. A lot of research on older adults, right? That looks at Those that are socially isolated are their mortality rates are higher. They have depression. They maybe are having more experiences with falls, but they're not feeling a sense of connection into the world. I know with my very own mother-in-law that we could see that with her, that she wasn't going out, she wasn't having conversations with others to keep her mind engaged, wasn't doing things that brought her a lot of joy. So I've seen that a lot in older adults, but also see that in my work with young adults that have cancer, in that they're, especially this last 15 months, right? What that has meant to them and their sense of connection to the world. But it is, if one gets cancer in young adulthood, we often think that, there's interruptions to their social development in terms of their connection to their, like you said, your career, going to school, building intimate relationships, your family roles, and what you do within the family. And so these connections that we have to the world, if we don't have these and we have a sense of isolation, that in my mind, I think is a direct route to despair. Feeling that we're going through something all alone. And how, when I see folks get engaged with a connection, like young adults, there was this amazing conference last weekend, this group called Stupid Cancer. Cancer sucks is their motto, and it's for young adults. They have a conference every year called CancerCon. And, on Zoom, the chat room is going, and it's like, you can see the messages. I thought I was the only one. Oh my God, somebody else understands what I'm going through. And you literally could just feel the sense of, a collective sigh, of people letting out this sense of isolation and, feeling like we have no connection to the universe, feeling like we're abnormal. But when we have other people and that we feel that we are connected and that we have this sense of universality, that it is a motivating factor. It keeps us moving forward, and I think gives hope, especially when one is in despair. I think even during the pandemic, we did some cool research with cat and dog owners, right? Um, who mostly in the US, and studied the benefits of having a companion dog and cat during the pandemic. And we found significant results, especially in young women, that their cat helped to buffer their sense of isolation. And reading their quotes were unbelievable. Like, I'm alone. I've chosen to, be a single mom, on my own, and going through this pregnancy during a pandemic, having my cat to cuddle and to, purring and petting the cat has given me a sense of connection, has helped my anxiety, helped my depression. I mean, just flooded through responses about how unbelievably small being could offer such a sense of connection.
Yeah, and that I read that work, and that's incredible, and it makes total sense. It was so cool to see, during the pandemic. My wife has been bugging me for a puppy for many years, and well, she said, well, just
Come on.
no, no, no. Let's wait until our two dogs are gone, and a third one would be too much. But we would get on Humane Society website or adoption websites and just look and just give out good prayers to those dogs. But it was so cool to see during the pandemic that when you'd go on the Larimer Humane Society website, and it says all dogs have been adopted, we don't have any available. And
Yeah.
to just see that and just be like, oh my gosh, people are really taking advantage of this adoption during this time. And my dogs definitely loved. I think the pandemic was probably one of their favorite times in their life history, because my wife and I both got to work
Yeah.
from home for a year and a half, and they got to spend almost every waking moment with us, and they just loved it. And it's got me thinking that as people bond so deeply with their pets during COVID, and then we start to go back to normal life and go back to our jobs and go back to our workplaces and leave our pets at home, if that's going to have a significant effect on the minds and emotions of our pets, having
Oh yeah.
bonded so closely with us, and if they're going to, if they're going to get depressed or anything like that. So that's got me thinking about that too.
Yes, Shane, that's really important. And that is one of the, he asked what has your dog been, more of a strain on your relationship, or what stressors have come up. And that was the biggest one. Besides those that had cats were afraid of their cat getting COVID and bringing it home. Um, Outdoor cats. And the other was, yeah, what's going to happen when I go back to work? Has my animal become more dependent on me? Will there be separation anxiety, tearing up the house? A couple people stated that they felt that their animal had better intuition and attunement to the human's emotions and this extra time at home.
Mhm.
And so, how's that bond going to change when we do go back? Um, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. They're noticing that some people are returning their dogs that have adopted them, which is a bummer, a
Keep it.
total bummer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. I, I don't know what that must feel like for the animal, because we don't know what animal consciousness is really like, but I put myself in their position, and you know, unfortunately, I put my human mind into their into their
Me
mind,
too.
and I have to think
Yeah.
like they must feel like so used, or that how traumatic it is to be adopted and loved and then just handed back.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
I can't. Yeah, my father was a veterinarian, and I'm super sensitive to animal emotions and feelings. And that is the hardest part, not knowing what's going on inside
Yeah.
in that feeling. I saw there's for the Colorado Book of the Year, I was listening to NPR, and there's a fictional book a woman wrote about an animal empath. Um, and she said she doesn't know if there's such a thing, but this book is about a young woman who is able to read animals' thoughts and be able to see like what's going on in their body. And her dad was a house burglar, and he would bring her to talk to the animals to let them into the house. And then she decided she'd go to vet school and use her skills for the good. So I purchased the book, just a little fun summer read, but I can't remember the name. Sorry.
Sounds really,
it's
that sounds
it's
really.
not at all related to what you would think. But I can look it up for us.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Dr. Dolittle movies where he can talk to animals.
Right.
Yeah, how cool. So back to this social component, right? And what you were
Yes.
talking about with the social piece brought up so many different thoughts. So I'm going to go on a bit of a diatribe here, and just throw some things out at you and see what sticks. So
Yeah.
first of all, what it reminds me of with the elderly is that phenomena where couples who are married and they're older and at the end of life, and one of them passes away, how often it happens that the partner, also
Yes.
passes away so much quickly after the first passes away. It almost like they don't want to be around anymore, or they would rather be with their loved one in the afterlife, or whatever, or they lose a lot of that meaning and purpose because they've lost their partner.
Yes.
It also reminds me of or it makes me wonder if because they you kind of see, when at least in our country, when folks get old, they either go into a home, like an assisted living home or a nursing home or something like that, or they have family members who can facilitate them living out the rest of their life and dying within the home, within the
Mhm.
family system. And it makes me wonder if one is perhaps better than the other as far as extending life, because I know in a lot of, sometimes you hear about the conditions of nursing homes or of, assisted living homes, that they're pretty bad. But they do get a lot of interaction with a lot of people their age, game nights, things like that. Whereas if an elderly person is at home, they may not get a lot of that interaction besides
Mhm.
just within their own family system. So I'm wondering if maybe that has an effect, and which one may be better for extending a lifespan. Um, and then also with the social component, and you were talking about youth. So my wife is a big time gamer. She plays video games
Oh,
online.
okay.
And during COVID, online gaming for her was a total savior for her social life, right? Like
Right.
I was still training, so I still had my social system within the gym and people that I did my martial arts with, but she didn't. And she relied on the online gaming community and those chat boards and things to connect with people. So now with all these new technologies too, it makes me wonder too, like what kind of quality of social interaction and social connection, and how well does it bring youth and teens and even adults who play video games like out of this place of isolation, even though they may be isolated in their homes, brings them out and allows them to connect with other people. So I know that's a lot of different things, but that's where my brain was going
Yeah.
in different directions with the social piece.
Yeah. I can definitely hit on what you said. Making notes here. Right. So if we'd only bought stock in GameStop,
Right.
right? That just, when I heard a story about that and how they were about to shutter their doors and then the pandemic hit and then it's like boom.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, you're absolutely right on it there in terms of a sense, gaming as a sense of social connection. Like I can tell the young adult groups that I do on Zoom how powerful. Like I've done support groups for 25 years, but having this group through Zoom for people that probably would not have met in the real world, but now Zoom's created this opportunity where they can have somebody to support them. Like they got deeply into their emotions and really some sacred feelings and like in the first group session, whereas in human in person, sorry, it might have taken them 4 or 5 sessions to get the sense of connection. So I've been talking with other oncology social workers, like, are you seeing the same thing too? And they're like, absolutely. People are going there a lot faster and a lot deeper in terms of these kind of close feelings that they're having. And I don't know if it's our safety of having like our pets by us or our comfortable setting. We could turn our screens off, I guess, if we got it too emotionally intense. But these kind of like false sense of being together, I'm gonna call it whatever technology you would call that, right? This virtual connection that seems to be even magnifying in some ways differently than if we were together in person.
Well, I certainly have a personal experience with that. I was over COVID. I was seeing a depth therapist. So he was a Jungian trained therapist, and we would do a lot of dream analysis. And he would use his dream analysis skill set to help me find deeper or archetypal meaning in some of my psychedelic or visionary states as well. So we're sort of addressing those as if they were dreams of
Uh-huh.
consciousness as well. And at the beginning of COVID, well, right before COVID, we were meeting in person, and it was, I would go in his office, and it was strictly business. So we were working real hard on some of these things, and then COVID hit, and we went to Zoom sessions. And a lot of my practice went to Zoom too. Um, but you're right. As soon as we went to this virtual platform, I found myself becoming much more emotional, much more able to tap into and even like cry about things and talk about things that I think I would be a little more resistant to in person, because I might feel I'm being judged. Whereas like this screen almost provides us a buffer,
Right.
where I don't have to deal with someone's energy, because I can feel that judgment coming off of them, but the screen provides that buffer. And I'm also
Right.
I'm in my home
Yeah.
and with my dogs, and I can turn off my screen. And, before COVID, we would see this with social media where, people would just put out really nasty posts and attack people, but they were doing that because of that screen type buffer, right? Like somebody
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily say those mean things to you in person, to your face, but with that screen, they feel more comfortable doing that. Well, we're seeing the opposite now too with like therapeutic work, and I experienced that myself. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it's been interesting talking to social workers about in their one-on-one interactions as well with clients and with youth in particular. Um, During COVID, I talked to some great social workers in British Columbia, and they have a more of like a county centralized social work health kind of role there. So they have a good idea about what's going on throughout the community. Maybe it's more we're siloed into our own professions here, but just looking at the youth there and not having to go into school and be in person, and how it had two completely different effects, right? For those that were in a wheelchair, nobody knew they were in a wheelchair because they're sitting at the same height, or if they'd had a lot of physical changes due to an illness, maybe a weight gain or something like that, then they can easily turn off this camera. But whereas if they were at school, they would have been bullied.
Mm.
And some people obviously missed, that are super, super social people, missed that sense of being present in person.
Yeah, I know even within my own cohort, we have a mixture of introverts and extroverts, and even in my household. So I'm sort of in between the two, but I present more as an extrovert, even though I live most of my life inside my head, trying to figure things out. My
Right.
my wife is a total introvert, and we had different experiences of COVID where she being an introvert felt like this is fine. Like this is great. Like this is what I was doing anyway. I was
Right.
staying home, and this is no big deal. And for me, like I just craved interaction. I craved giving people hugs. I wanted to be out there and interacting with people, and it was really, really hard for me. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I saw that in my cohort members too.
Right.
Some were just like, yeah, this is fine. I could do this forever. Others were like, I can't wait for this to end.
Yeah. And I'm not a huggy person. You can ask my PhD cohort. They're always joke me, can I give you a hug now? Is today like a big enough occasion where you'll actually accept a hug? And I'm like, okay. And I do consider myself an introvert, and have found myself lacking like this. I want to touch, I want to give hugs, and like I want to be around people and have that presence. So it's been really interesting looking at my own self and seeing, maybe I'm more extroverted than I thought I was.
Yeah, and I've noticed too when at least in the last couple months since restrictions have been, lessened a little bit, and I do find myself hugging people. My hugs are like really long now.
Yeah,
Whereas before it's just like a quick little, oh hey, how's it going? Now I'm even with good friends, men and women, and whoever. I'm just holding those hugs for 30 or 60 seconds, and we're just like
yeah,
feel each other's heartbeat. Like this feels so good.
yeah, yeah. You're right. That warmth, that like the muscle tension that you can't
Mhm.
get from a screen, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about your past and current research into hope and meaning making. I think that those two aspects of our human experience overlap really well with my own interests in research and my interests in life. And the audience is already well aware of what my research interests are with the mystical experience and psychedelics and things like that. And I just find that. For me at least, psychedelic experiences, that's one of the greatest benefits that we can derive from psychedelic experiences is just this sense of connection that we gain from the substances that we.
Mhm.
Um, and we don't have to do anything to feel that sense. You can be by yourself out in the woods and have a psychedelic in your system and feel completely connected to the world around you and the trees and the animals, and the air that you breathe, that you have a conversation through your breath and through your oxygen intake and exhaling with the trees around you, and especially with people. Like my more intense psychedelic experiences have brought me to um, visionary states or states of consciousness where I feel like I have engaged like a collective consciousness, or that I've become connected on a different level mentally with all of humanity all at one time. And when I come out of those experiences, and you don't need a psychedelic to experience that, you can do it through meditation or through, gardening or something. But I
Right.
come out of those experiences having felt like I connected with all of humanity. And then, it seems dumb to me that we're killing the planet and that we're fighting wars and that we're arguing with each other over politics, or that it seems um primitive to me.
Right.
um
Right.
so
Right.
I'm super interested in how that overlaps with your research around hope and meaning making and connection, and um being social with other people. And I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes. As you know, I am a big fan of your research. So give you a shout out for I can't wait to see your next steps on that. So yeah, let's see what got me started in this world. I guess like right I guess for me, my work, like thinking about grief and loss, like I went to school to be an orthodontist, right? Thinking like, oh, what's really important is our smile and our image, having gone through tons of jaw surgery and stuff. And I got in school, like, no, it's really what's on the inside and how we present to the world, what gives our life a sense of meaning and purpose, and how are we interconnected into the greater world. Um, and so I went into psychology, and then I was like, I took a social work class, and I was like, this is it. This is like, how do we fit in our community, and how can our community and our own social systems that we have, how can they help sustain us, and how can we sustain them? So I went into that and like went straight into working in hospice work. So I was 23 when I first had my first hospice client. So as you can imagine, I knew very little about like the true experience of death and dying. I had a dear friend, my college roommate, died right before we were to move in together, and I felt like my soulmate. I can go back to that, which you might find interesting, and how we channel the spirits to know our past relationships. But anyway, so keeping on this path, that's the only real sense, of grief and loss, and losing grandparents, which seems, natural process, right? When they're in their mid 80s. But then I started working in oncology and working with kids, um, from 6 months old to 18. At the same time, I'm working with older adults on hospice, and looking at what is important in their life, like at the end of life, what gives their life value, and what do they want to leave behind. And so this sense of social connection, even though our bodies aren't here, how do we build this when we're not here? um, and working with kids, I saw this sense of like, I'm not ready to die yet until I know that my family is taken care of,
Mm.
that they know that they are safe. There was not an understanding of the spiritual realm, right? Their fear of the process of dying was not there. It was more of like an innocent experience in terms of, the process of death itself. And I think as we age, we know more about what can happen and how bad things can be. We maybe know more about our connection um, with our spiritual world and what happens after our body dies. But older adults, I saw it was more, centered on themselves, obviously caring about their family and what they can leave behind. But it was really different having this younger life and older life to be able to compare about what gave us hope and what kept us moving forward. So it's kind of like my initial entree into thinking about it. But then I worked for many years in hospice and in cancer world, and met so many people that you could look at their, as I mentioned, you can look at, a CAT scan and see, from my lay eyes looking up at the board with all the x-rays, all these white spots, you would know that that's not a good sign, right? Because they were all masses. um, and then somebody that has a smaller spot in a less vital organ, right? And their lives could take completely different paths, where the person with more cancer lives longer because they have something that they're looking forward to, whether it's a graduation, a trip, a family member that they haven't, had that sense of closure on a relationship, um, or somebody who's not feeling a sense of connection, doesn't have family member or friends that they want to be there to live for, that they don't have this hope, this motivating force to move them forward. And so what I really wanted to know, like, what is it? What are the factors? How does hope? What do we do? Is it our bodies? Is it our minds? Is it our social connections? What are the factors that motivate behavior? And in particular, I wanted to know for young adults that have advanced cancer, because I felt like when they were in treatment, that we as a whole medical team were more focused on get your pills in your body. We're going to, try and slow your cancer down as much as we can. And that's our goal. But we lost focus, except for some of us in the background going, hey, what are you doing this weekend? What are you looking forward to? How are your friends reaching out to you? That we tended to focus more on what's going on in their body, but not what their life is like. We didn't help them balance life in treatment and outside of treatment. So we found a lot of folks stopped taking their medications because they felt bad. The chemotherapy wasn't helping them feel better. So they said, I'm just going to not take all my pills, or I'm going to stop because I want to go to this event. I want to be with my friends and have my chance at a life. Um, so they were altering their care, and we weren't doing a good job of listening how we can support them to better comfort them, physically, so they can do the things that they want to do, in terms of their social or spiritual connections. So that's why I went back to school to kind of do a grounded theory study to figure out what are these processes that help them to engage hope.
And what did you find as far as the processes of youth to engage that?
Yeah. And I'm curious to know if this would be similar for folks that have other, chronic or life limiting illnesses or mental health concerns, right? Or a significant loss in their lives. But I think like there are several different phases that people can come in, or processes that people go through. Not saying that it's circular, right? But they can when a threat comes, it can change these things. So it's a sense of navigating the uncertainty is the first part. Like, oh my God, what is going on? For these young adults, it was, also this sense of feeling broken, right? I broken physically, like my legs don't work. I have no hair. I can no longer have children, which was huge, and not something that was talked about within their health system. Um, Also lost spiritually, feeling a sense of spiritually broken, in terms of a lot of folks that had really, really strong faith going into their illness. And I can say a religious faith, right? That how could a just God do this to me? My brother is doing all kinds of bad stuff, eating junk, not exercising, and just doing a lot of things that aren't healthy, making bad decisions. And I'm the one that gets sick, and I do everything right. So that's kind of that sense of spiritual broken. A lot of the young adults didn't have a sense of a religious faith, but were more connected to nature and to pets. And then socially broken. So again, a lot of my folks were in college or starting their jobs, and they had to quit what they were doing. A lot of folks had to move back home with their parents. So as you can imagine, this budding life, and then boom, you got to go back to stay with your parents, right? Um, and that was a lot to dealing with income and insurance and things like that. So then I moved into like the sense of disorienting grief. So it's like who we were, who we thought we were going to be, what how our sense of, world order is completely not there anymore. A lot of folks described it as kind of being dropped from a plane onto a desert island where you don't have a map, and then you meet the one other person and they don't speak the same language that you do. It's just like everything around you, you have no more orientation to what you think that your life was going to be.
Mm.
And then it's this kind of sense of rekindling or building back, or like this sense of who you are, like gaining your strength again. So a lot of folks, physical strength, right? Going back to the gym and doing these kinds of things, building support networks that we feel like we can pump us back up. A lot of folks turned to people that didn't know that they had cancer. So folks that they, didn't post on Facebook because they didn't want them to know, because a lot of folks expected them to be the person they were before, or expected them to be sick and not to be somebody that could have cancer but still be the same person. So it's really hard to connect to people that knew them before. So it's like building the sense of community. And then lastly, I think, which was the key thing and the key problem for folks, is that they couldn't reconcile like who they were before and who they are now. And so hope for them was really getting to find a way or a space that they felt kind of like these essential parts or salient parts of their identity before cancer could somehow blend or marry with the knowledge and life skills and sense of meaning that they've made from their illness.
Mm.
So hope was really building kind of these people and skills to be able to cope and to sort of somehow frame it that it's something that's positive, right? That they can take it and move forward.
Wow, that's incredible. Um, it reminds me, and I definitely want to respect that it's not the same situation what I'm about to share, but I see similarities too with um, one of my biggest processes in my life that I went through. I think it was in 2006. My whole life I had been an athlete, and lots of varsity sports, and um, all these things. And so a large part of my identity was wrapped up in my physical capabilities and what I'm
Yeah.
able to do. And then in 2006, I experienced my first catastrophic injury. I had my right ACL in my knee just completely blow out. Um, and from and it was a horrendous injury, but also a bunch of botched surgeries afterwards. I got a terrible staph infection in my heart.
Ooh.
I had a pick line into my heart and a vacuum pump on my knee, and
Oh.
I had 5 surgeries to correct it, and almost, I was on the verge of death because of a lot of those infections. And throughout that process, I lost myself. I lost my identity. What I thought I was, this athlete, was completely stripped away from me in an instant, and it was extremely tough. It put me in a tailspin. It made me depressed. I re-engaged with some of my addictive behaviors, just really feeling lost and no sense of meaning and purpose. If I couldn't be an athlete, then who could I be? And I didn't want to be on this planet if I couldn't be myself. I
Right.
lost entire friend groups,
Yes.
and it was extremely tough. And that experience is actually what inspired me to go get my master's degree in sport and performance psychology, because I didn't have a sports psychology professional to help me through the psychological part of injury or illness.
Right.
I had the medical doctors trying to help me through the physical part, but they didn't provide anything as far as counseling to get through the mental part, and that part was certainly more difficult. So for me, I had to figure it out on my own, and luckily I did. And what I figured out, and what I like to carry forward, and I see it now as a strength, because without this experience, I couldn't possibly help other athletes or other people through their own tumultuous times like this too. But what I discovered for myself was that, um, as I was beginning to question, who am I, and who am I if I'm not an athlete? What I discovered or rediscovered was that I was so much more than what I thought I was to begin with.
Yeah.
Like you said, like this innate sense of self, like before the cancer, like before my injury, remembering, oh, wait, I'm more than an athlete. I'm a brother. I'm a son. I'm a student. I'm a
Right.
roommate. I'm all these other things, and then because I was laid up in bed for months or years at a time, I was provided an opportunity. The universe kind of sat me down and said, "You're going to take a break from this athletic thing, and you're going to use that energy and get an opportunity to pour it into all these other different buckets of your."
Right.
And that's what I did. So I got really heavy into Buddhism, my meditation. I got really heavy into my relationships, friends that I hadn't talked to for years as I was competing. I rekindled those relationships. And once I finally healed physically, I could return back to that martial arts, to that athletics, not at the level that I could before, but I could still re engage. And I had done so much work on all these other areas of my life that when I finally got to get back to it, I felt so much more like a whole or complete person than
I
I
love that.
ever was before. And so
Right.
it reminds me exactly of what you're talking about, how we can turn our challenges, in the moment they seem terrible and they seem like all meaning and hope is stripped away, but with some time in there and with some distance and hopefully with some guidance and coaching and therapy or something like that, we can turn those experiences into strengths and not
Mhm.
only help ourselves get through it and come out the other end having experienced like some post-traumatic growth,
Right. Right.
also using those experiences as strengths to maybe extend that to someone else and help someone else get through it. And that continues to build on our experience.
Yes, it's funny that you say that because that is one of the key things I found in terms of this last sense of being able to reconcile for the young adults was being able to mentor other young adults that were going through the same thing. Because it's their cancers are so rare, they didn't know anybody, and they themselves suffered in isolation. But when they could find somebody else that was new and to say, hey, nobody wants to be a case study because that means you're the only one. But you know what? I'm a case study and I'm still here. And if I can do this, I think that you can do this. It was so powerful hearing them talk about this transition within themselves and like completely changing their careers. They were no longer on that path, but now they're on, maybe they wanted to do, cancer research in the laboratory, or they wanted to be work for a foundation that raises money for folks for cancer, or be at a call center to support people, but that the experience completely changed their lives.
Yeah. I'm just reflecting more on different aspects of my life too, in an effort to hopefully encourage the listeners to look at their own lives and see like what challenges have you been through and how can you use those challenges to maybe mentor others going through similar challenges. And the mentorship process not only helps others achieve their goals and get through those similar challenges, but it pays dividends back to you when you mentor.
Absolutely.
So for me, like again, going back to jujitsu, like for me, it's been a 15-year journey so far, and so many challenges, injuries, and struggles every single day on the mat, and ego death daily, uh,
Right.
and all these things. And then now I'm at a level where I'm teaching, and we have new students come in all the time, and they're going through a lot of the same stuff that I've already been through. So being able to mentor them and say, hey, you know, what you're going through is totally normal, and here's some advice on how I got through it, and here's what to look forward to, and here's some of the roadblocks to avoid. So that's
Yeah.
a big piece. And then I'm thinking of you too in your position at CSU as an assistant professor. And you know, having gone, I'm going through the PhD program right now, and it's one of the biggest challenges of my life so far. And you know, the work is challenging, yes, but the emotional piece, the self-searching, the you know, dealing with criticism and dealing with all these things that come through going through a program like that has been the most challenging piece of this experience for me. um, and for you in your position, like, you've been through it, you know, you've completed the PhD, you've gone through all that piece. And so
Still carry the wounds.
yeah, right. And so now you're, you know, you're mentoring people like myself, and encouraging us and helping us realize that what we're going through is not, you know, it's not unique necessarily, that this is a part of the process, that the self-searching and tearing apart our own beliefs and rebuilding these things is a painful process, but it is a part of this PhD process, and encouraging us to keep going and keep searching and keep, you know, put your head down and just keep doing it. I'm just thinking of these aspects of my own life and overlap with your life, and hoping that, you know, others out there who are listening to this can examine their own lives too and be like, you know, I'm going through struggles, but others have too. And if I need help, maybe I can reach out to someone as a mentor, or maybe I can mentor someone else through things.
Absolutely. Right. 100%. I think I don't know if folks are familiar with Viktor Frankl and his work. You know, for me, that was kind of a pivotal read of mine early on.
Can you talk a little bit about him and his
Yeah,
book? Because
yeah,
I don't think a lot of listeners probably know who he is.
yes. So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, right? Psychologist, psychiatrist. Was a Jewish man who was taken into Auschwitz along with his family and lived for many years in a concentration camp and saw so many people around him dying and suffering and in the hands of some horrific torture, as we all know what we've read about or learned from our families or passed down. Um, and so he goes into this state having an understanding of human motivation, of human behavior, and really he himself near death tried to figure out what am I going to learn from this, what is the sense of meaning. And so he kept journals and thinking about human behavior and his own thought processes, which were taken from him. So he recreated these later and continued his work. But he is looking at, you know, what can we gain from suffering? There has to be something that we gain from that. And his book is just a beautiful presentation, Man's Search for Meaning. And it's VIKTORFRANKL. Just to help spelling, because I'm not the best speller, but Man's Search for Meaning, I highly recommend it. But it does give an insight into these kinds of things that help us to make sense of the suffering. And so the one that hits me most in sense of meaning, that he has different aspects, but for me, it's the creative spirit. And so my work with young adults, after doing all of my dissertation work and writing up this contingent hope theory, was looking at what can I do to help young adults find this sense of meaning, not as a young adult survivor myself, but thinking about, you know, what is it that I've learned and seen people that really gets me excited. And young adults I know love their phones, right? And love taking pictures and love Instagram and Facebook and kind of tell their stories as sort of like narrative healing that they do through photo images. So I created like a photo voice project and a group intervention for young adults that looks at this sense of creativity. And for you, it sounds like you also reached into your own creativity and looking at making meaning of everything, right? When you were struggling with everything and connecting your identity to your loss, right?
Yeah. And, I'm not I took a couple photo classes in in high school, and I love
Yeah,
photography. My brother's a professional photographer, which is really cool. Um, but for me, like my creativity comes out through my martial arts, through my jujitsu.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and new that's what I love about jujitsu as opposed to other martial arts, is other martial arts sort of have a library of techniques, and they have a finite boundary around them, and what has been established is established, and it doesn't go any further. Whereas with jujitsu, new techniques and new moves are being invented every single day. Like yesterday, I did a private lesson with one of my great friends and black belt professors down in Lakewood, and we were just messing around and rolling on the ground, and I invented a new choke with my gi in it, and he was like, "Whoa, that was really cool." So, like that's how we engage our creativity, is like we invent these new ways to manipulate bodies and things like that, and it's really fun. And so, yeah, I do engage that in my own life, and that's such a great way to do it. The way you were talking with engaging teens with the photos, and you're totally right. Like that's how they, and adults too, that's how we tell our narrative, that's how we get it out there, that's how people get a look into our lives, is through our photos.
Right, right. And I encourage them, hey, let's not censor our photos, right? Let's, not only put up what positive things happened in our lives, like really what's going on, like talk about who you are, right? What makes you who you are, your struggles for who you are. We do a section on coping with bad days. So bring me that picture of what a bad day is for you, and how we talk about how you get through that bad day. Bring a picture of like dealing with uncertainty, right? That's one of the hardest things that we've all had to deal with, this universal sense of uncertainty over the past
Mhm.
15 months, right? So like bring it out, bring the good, bring the bad, and not censor it. So it's been powerful work.
Yeah. What is your take on making meaning from suffering?
What is my own take from it?
Yeah, because it can be
Yeah,
extremely powerful.
yeah, it can be super powerful, and people can get super pissed off when
Yeah.
you ask them about it as well, right?
Hopefully you're not getting pissed about me asking you about it.
No, not one bit at all. When I give it to folks, I add that as a caveat for maybe those that are just delving into thinking about this world. It's very important to think about, how we phrase things like this, right? Like I do research with social workers in the pandemic, and it's like, has there been anything that you've learned about yourself through this process? Silver lining, some people go resilience, but
Mhm.
it's like, what are these life lessons, these little nuggets that came out that maybe you were surprised about? um, but yeah, I think for me in my own personal life, I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't had some type of struggle and suffering in my life. It takes me to my own deeper place and causes me to be introspective about, why is this happening to me in my life. I always, you know have this motto that my husband taught me. He's Scottish. It's like, what's for you won't go by you. And
Say,
I think about that. Huh?
say that again.
What's for you won't go by you.
Or you won't go by you.
So it's kind of like this sense of fate, and what's meant to be is meant to be, right? And I can be, and like something horrible can happen to me. And I'm like, there's got to be a reason that this is happening now. Or if I'm expecting something to happen and I just pretty much can guarantee that I know what's going to happen, it's going to be a great thing, and it falls through. That, all right, let me just step back and think, like, why did this fall through? Because I know there's a reason for it, but when is it going to come and what is it going to be? Um, and so I always try, for my own suffering, I just try and step back and think, there's a reason for this, and I don't know what the reason is, but whatever is meant to happen is going to happen at some point. I just need to sit in it. And sometimes sitting in the suffering, or I call it in my work, sitting in the messy, that sometimes the most brilliant things can come out of the mess.
Yeah. And I've learned so much from my suffering. I have I have this feeling that throughout most of my life, most of my deepest learning has been through pain or through suffering of some sort.
Mhm.
And I personally, I don't like that pattern that I learn mostly through pain and suffering.
I think it's common.
Yeah, but so I've been trying to engage this other, I guess, mantra and just asking the universe, like giving gratitude, like thank you for all the learning that you've provided me through suffering, but also asking like, but hey, like I can learn through joy and happiness. So can you please provide me more opportunities to learn through joy and happiness as well? And with my
Right.
clients, it is a sensitive subject, and most of my clients in my practice don't come to me because they're doing well in life or they perceive that
Right.
they do it because they're suffering in some sense.
Right.
And when you're in that suffering, it can be so difficult to be in the suffering and also identify the learning at the same time.
Yes.
And so,
Absolutely.
a lot of time, what I say is, you may not at this point know what the purpose of this suffering is for, but maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years down the road, once you're out of it, you'll be able to look back at this point in your life and identify what it was meant for and what it was teaching you and how you grew from it and how you can use it as a strength. So I think just reminding people that you may not be able to see the learning right now, but in the future you may have 2020 vision on this experience. Even just saying that provides people with a little bit more hope that, okay, like I may be in it right now, but eventually, like, I'll be able to look back at this and it will be a positive thing for me.
Right. And this, like the meat of the process of getting to there is what makes us who we are. It forms our character, right?
Mhm.
But it's not something you, right, like you said, you want to hear about. Like, no. I
Yeah.
don't can't see anything positive in it. Yeah, you're right. I love the idea of, hey, can you send me a little joy here and a little rainbow? Sorry,
Yeah, no.
garbage collection day.
So you did mention, and I had no idea this about you, that you wanted to be you say an orthodontist? Yeah, you wanted to be an orthodontist, but you also mentioned that you had a number of jaw surgeries as well, and I assume that that was in your late teens or early 20s or something, because you said 22, you switched directions. And so that in and of itself must have been a huge struggle, a huge challenge for you to go through, especially in the teenage years, right? When our outward image towards our peers means so much, and you're going through these body changing surgeries. And it sounded like, and I hope you can, if you don't mind, expand on this a little bit, because I think a lot of people could get some value from this. Um, it sounded like, like most teens, that we were caught up in our outward image towards other people, that what was on the outside, what is what mattered to people, and we gave very little thought to what was inside. But then you also said you reached a transition point in your life where the outside didn't matter as much to you, and you were like, no, it's what's inside that really counts for people. And I'm wondering if you can speak not only about your experience going through some of those challenges, if you don't mind, you don't have to, but also talk about that transition point and how you got from a place of being externally focused to being internally focused. I still feel like a lot of, if not the majority of Americans, are still, even in adulthood, outwardly focused. We're materialistic. We got to drive the fanciest cars, and we got to wear designer clothing, and we have to get plastic surgery and like all these things. and we still give less emphasis on the internal, on what a person really is at their core. And I find that that's so much more important. I can remember myself being more outwardly focused, especially in high school and probably my undergrad as well. And then when I found my spirituality, I think that was the transition for me, that, oh, like my core being is what is that's what I'm bringing to this world. That's what's going to last long after I'm gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like your legacy, right? Nobody's going to remember. I mean, people will remember what you look like, right? But what you leave on the world is an imprint that you've made, and these, your recordings that you do, the clients' lives that you've touched, right? That's what's going to make a difference. Right. So yeah, my great grandfather was an oral surgeon. My grandfather was a dentist. My uncle was an orthodontist.
Wow.
My dad was a vet, and I'm like, no way, I can't do. Cry my eyes out. So like, I can't do that. So maybe I'll go in the line. And then yes, I have braces, and they did these funky like magnets where the poles of the magnets, I had to wear them like a retainer, and then they pushed against each other, and I had to wear the strap around my head. Thankfully at night I had to wear that during the day, right? But I was 16, and then all of this weird stuff they done made so that my teeth only touched in the back. They never, there was a whole area. So when I bite into a sandwich, the whole sandwich would come right back out.
Wow.
Um, so they needed to do an osteotomy, which basically is you go into the OR and they completely disengage the top half of my jaw from the rest of my face.
Wow.
And then they cut your bone down, and then put it back together, screw it shut, and then wire your mouth together for a month. So I was at a brand new high school for maybe like 3 months, small one, like 100 students in my class. They called me Jaws. So yeah, I've always been somebody too that I try and let stuff roll off my back as much as possible. And so I knew that there was a greater good for why my surgery was happening. I had some good friends, and was never the popular girl. I played saxophone in the band. So I didn't have a lot of investment in, being a popular person. So maybe that's a little bit, different from some kids these days. But you're right. So I went to college. I'm like, I'm going to help other people. I know I gained a lot from, being able to, smile and show my teeth and being able to eat. Right. But then I got in and I thought, these classes, these science classes, yeah, we're learning all about, physics and matter and chemistry and equations and biology and the poor frog that we're dissecting. This to me did not make sense. And I didn't feel like I was benefiting the greater good, right? And I was like, I don't care. I don't really, what your smile is one part of who you are. Obviously, it's your external appearance of your emotions, right? What you're doing with your face. And what your teeth look like doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of life, right? What really matters in our coping, I think, is what's going on the inside. And see what is it that's going on in here that makes us smile or not smile. And so I was compelled to ditch the family history and professions and move into psychology. I loved it. I felt like I fit in, and just kind of understanding why the mind, why we tick, why the mind does what it does. This was way back when. So I think we've learned so much more about the mind body connection. I mean, this was, back in the 1990, right? So we know so much more in this field of mental health. And then social work, like I said, was really, I went into that class and they were, playing music, and we had to write lyrics about a certain aspect of our lives. And to me, I was like, oh, here we go. The creativity got me, really sunk me in. I never had classes like that in psychology, but in social work, we were taught to engage sort of like all of our senses in the work that we were doing, and how could we be a little bit more creative and connecting with people. And so I think that's what drew me into social work. Also, not having to get my PhD, then here I am with my PhD. 20 years later, I go back. But I think can sing social work praises higher, and loving that I found my way to where I am. I think that social work, I love, as a person that's works with people that are healing through illness, are healing amidst illness, that who they are and where they are and their, you know, who makes them who they are. It's the world around them. It's the things that bring them joy, the activities that they do. That's what gets me going.
Yeah, people are not they're not healing and they're not suffering in isolation. That's for sure.
Yeah,
They're healing within family systems, they're healing within friend systems, within hospital systems, with
right.
and so yeah, social work really touches on all of that, the environment around people as well as the interactions they have, the meaning that they make from the activities they do.
Mhm.
I think all of those things, and that's part of the reason why I love social work above and beyond psychology is because psychology is so limited to just the inner world, but that inner world and outer world are two sides of the same coin, you know,
Right.
and they interact with each other. And yeah, so interesting. When you were talking, and again, back to the mind body stuff, I was reminded of some of my favorite studies, and there's probably criticisms out. Actually, I'm sure there's criticisms of these studies out there, but I still love them to death. One is I don't know if you've heard of any of these studies. One is was done in Japan, where this gentleman did experiments on water and had people meditate either positive or negative words into a glass of water in front of them, and then he froze the molecules in that state. And
Uh-huh.
what he found was that water that was charged up with positive intentions formed these beautiful crystals that were symmetric and they looked like snowflakes and just so
Oh,
beautiful.
wow.
And then the water that had been charged up with negative intentions looked malformed and just really nasty and not symmetrical. And it, I mean, you can take what you want from that, but what I take from that is that our thoughts carry a lot of power, right? Our
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
even outside of our head and wherever the mind is situated, whether the mind is actually in our body or whether the mind is around us. Our thoughts have impact on matter, both internally and externally. And I think that study sort of shows that. And it also reminds me that our body is, 70% made of water. So whatever we think about ourself probably has a significant impact on that molecular level with the water
Mhm.
our body is contained. And if we're saying
Yeah.
positive things, then we're creating this
Mhm.
beautiful internal system within us. Whereas if we're saying negative things about ourselves, we're creating disease, we're creating
Absolutely.
cancer, we're creating all sorts of things within ourselves with our mind. It also reminded me of some of those studies where people would meditate on plants, and
Yeah.
some plants you say positive things, you play
Yes.
nice music for them, and they
Yes.
grow nice and beautiful, and then you curse at other plants and tell them you're gonna hurt them or whatever, and they don't grow as well or they shrivel
Yeah.
up and die. So it just reminds me of those things too.
I
um,
think about that totally when you were talking about that. I was thinking about plants. Yeah. I think in fourth grade, I did a project on the plants and seeing what they do when we talk to them. Yeah.
yeah, nice.
There.
Um, so I wanted to delve a little bit deeper with you, and you already brought up Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
and I know that he's a very important figure within the realm of existential psychology and
Mhm.
existential questioning, and that's one of my favorite. I guess self-thought experiment, self-study, self-questioning realms that I go into is the existential. Uh,
Mhm.
Partly because I think existential questions, which for the listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, they're really like the deepest questions that we ask ourselves about who we are and our existence and how we fit into the universe and what it all means and what life is and what consciousness is and all these big, deep, sometimes seemingly unanswerable questions. And I think those are my favorite types of questions to explore.
Mhm.
That's why I have this podcast, is to explore that kind of stuff. And I think that's what Viktor Frankl was touching on, for a lot of these journals that you're talking about, is, these people that he's witnessing and watching. A lot of them knew that they were going to die, and that they were going to die in terrible ways. And a lot of them were searching for meaning, even knowing that they were, they were in an internment camp, and they, how do these people still find meaning and purpose amidst the knowledge that they're going to die? And I think these are questions that we all ask ourselves at one point in our life. Some of us go a little bit deeper into asking and trying to find answers than others. Some ask the question and get scared away by the question. Um, but I have a feeling that you are one of those people that you ask these existential questions of yourself and of other people, and um, you get answers, and you get more questions, and you want to go deeper. and and so yeah, can you talk a little bit about your experience with your own consciousness and your own exploration of existential questions you've asked yourself, and that journey that you've been on in your life?
Right, right. It's one that certainly has become more fruitful older in life. I think, as we're younger, and maybe there are some people that start this journey earlier that have had a trauma in their life, that I think we don't just naturally come to these types of process. I think something large, traumatic, life altering gets us to start having these questions, right? Um, yeah. So for me, I think probably I started having these questions when I was in college, and my soulmate was killed in a car accident 2 weeks before we were supposed to move in together. And I had this sense of connection with a human being that I've never had before. Um, and so we were going to, we knew each other our freshman year. We were going to move together in our sophomore year into her room. And so I'm in this space, which was her space, which was going to be our space, her dorm room, which is going to be our dorm room. And it caused me to start questioning, like, why did this happen? Why can't I escape? Like, I couldn't get another room. I had to be in that room. I wasn't allowed to choose someplace else. So for me, what does this mean for me? And I went into a serious depression for probably about a year and a half, because I didn't understand why this was happening. I think the bigger picture of it led me to go into the field that I'm in, right? To look at grief and loss and how other people experience their own personal losses. So I think that was my bigger picture of the whole thing, but to give me so that I could relate to people better. Because I think if I'd gone into the field without having, gone through something like that, that I could not have done it. But I think about, I live in my head quite a bit too, Shane. And think about, why do I do the things I do to myself, right? Why do I pile my plate so high that and it's midnight and I'm still awake, but I got a smile on my face and I'm like, could I go another 2 hours? Because I really like what I'm doing. And so for me, I want to be surrounded by things that give my life a sense of meaning and purpose. If it's going to be hard, it better darn well be something that I feel is out there and making a difference in the world. It doesn't matter just to me. I need to be doing something that matters to other people. Did I get this sense of, like, my family have pretty much all been in helping professions? Did I get this from them? Is it this sort of moral sense that I feel like I need to be doing something, giving back to the world, that I was put here for a reason? And what is that reason? Because I don't know that for me, if I stayed an orthodontist, maybe I would have had that feeling, but I feel like I was meant to be doing what I'm doing. Um, and so I think, each day I wake up, do my yoga, and think about, what is my purpose? What am I going to do today? And I find great value from the work that I do. For me, it's mentoring other people too, to be able to be here and to spur them to look at their own identity and what it is that motivates them, what drives them to make the world a better place, what drives them to reach out and connect to someone else, especially in social work. Like, why are you doing this? This isn't the easiest profession in the world. You're certainly not going to be paid well. Why are you doing this? So to follow them through their own development, I love that mentoring process. And that, I think, gives me a sense of connection to the greater cause of the world. I work with a lot of people that are at end of life and thinking about, what did they give to the world? And so I don't like to sit with them in suffering. That is a bad way to say it. But I like to be able to be there and be present with them, and to be able to listen and to support and to help them navigate their thought processes about what my life has been like, what value am I giving to the world. And maybe if it's somebody that's stuck and doesn't understand this, to help them think about maybe what they still can do, or to think about what has somebody given to them, and how has somebody shared value that's made their own life more meaningful. If they can't think of something that they've given, what is something someone has given to them?
Wow. Um, I have a question and a comment. The question is going to sort of blow this idea up into large scale, and then the comment will bring it back down.
Okay.
So you're talking about meaning and purpose on the planet, and your place in it, and how you bring value to the greater good on this world. So my larger question is, because this is a question I ask myself too. And I think, well, before I get there, I think my purpose on this planet and what I think it is evolves and changes every day. And that's okay, and
Yeah.
we find new purposes and we let go
Yes.
of old purposes. And that's perfectly fine. We don't have to nail down one thing necessarily and just go after it. So I want to encourage people to have flexibility in their own thinking about their own life purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But a question I always ask myself, is beyond this world, right? Because this planet is only one in billions of stars in our galaxy, among billions of galaxies in this universe, and who knows if there are trillions of different universes. um, what what is my purpose amidst the cosmos? What is my purpose beyond this world? What is my contribution, and how is it helping to move all of creation and all of everything that has ever existed and ever will exist? Do you ever ask yourself that super huge existential question?
Gosh, I haven't, Shane. I haven't, but what is it, right? Um, Goodness, when you're saying that, I could see sort of like this colorful light, right? Like this sense of energy
Mm.
is what I see. And that maybe that my energy, and when I'm around people, I can, share that energy with them.
Mhm.
Um, and to maybe grow the brightness of the energy, or the power of that. Yeah, I don't know. When you ask that question, this is thinking about dreams and consciousness, right? So, and the work I do is a lot of helping people with their feelings, and making sense of them and of their lives, right? So I had this dream one night that I died, and that I went to heaven, and I don't, if this happens or not, I have no idea. But so I'm in this place, and my job is the welcome committee, and I'm greeting everyone that comes in and saying, "Hey, you're dead, but how are you doing with this?" And I was like, really? Like, am I ever going to get away from this business? Like, even when I die and go into my next being world, that I'm still doing the same kind of work, and that I'm like a welcome wagon for people, on the other side of where I've led them to. Dreams are a powerful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
I
haven't. That's a great question, Jane. I'll have to think about that. But I think at the moment, I see myself as being like, as my energy, as being something that I can add in terms of a positive and a contagious process.
Yeah, and I love that answer, and that's about as far as I've gotten too with with my own answer with it, is that the energy that I put out into this world, and my intentions and my positivity that I put into my work and into other people, that doesn't just end with that transaction, that it ripples out,
Mhm.
far beyond that. And the things I do, in my practice with my clients, I may help somebody, but then they may go help somebody, and they may go help somebody, and the publications that you put out, you don't even know who and how many people read them and become inspired
Right.
to go do more and more. So my take on it is that, number one, like, my legacy is not going to be the work, the words that I put down on paper necessarily. In 1,000 years, nobody's going to remember who Shane Lemaster is and the work that he did, or anything that I've ever done. But what is going to remain is the energy that I put out there,
Mhm.
the ripple effect that it has on the world. And so I believe that my legacy is to take what I've been given and to utilize it to the best of my ability and to the fullest potential, and to leave the world a better place than how I found it. And that hopefully that will ripple out beyond the world, out into the cosmos, and who knows, billions and trillions of years from now, those ripples may reach alien species, or may reach other universes, and will have some sort of physical impact on the universe, on energy elsewhere. And
Right,
that's
right.
that's as far as I've gotten, but I love that answer that you gave, because I think it's probably the closest we can get to figuring that out until we're actually there and we become
Fair,
one.
right. Yeah. I do. I have a research group that meets on every Tuesday. And we call it the Existential Working Group. And we are looking at people who have terminal lung cancers, looking at what they think about their death. And when asked about their own dying process, what are their fears? What are they thinking about? And it's really interesting thinking about their connection and hearing people's what happens to my body when I die, and what is my legacy in this world. How it's so different if people have children or not children. People without children, it's interesting. You meet educators, and that's their legacy they're leaving is through other people. But it's really interesting to see when at death's door or close to it. How do we make meaning out of life at that very point, and what does death mean, and what happens to our bodies when we die?
Mhm. I think it's important to, I heard this other podcast yesterday, and this guy was saying, most people go through life thinking that they're going to live a full life and die at the end of life in their 70s or 80s. And he's,
Mhm.
how ridiculous is that we go through life just having the assumption that we're going to die of old age somewhere? Like, we have no idea of when it's going to happen. And so I think this group that you're talking about, and the people that you're talking to with terminal illness, give us such a great lesson for ourselves, those of us who aren't dealing with those kind of issues, is that death is right around the corner. Like, we are always on death's door. It's always a possibility. We're not guaranteed a long life until our 70s and 80s. So when can we, or why can't we engage those sorts of mindsets to find meaning and purpose and live into that now? Like,
Right,
single day, and not wait until we're old or we're dying to start to ask those questions. We should be asking those questions now, because we could lip off this earth tomorrow.
right. And I have definitely seen that in my life. Yeah. They and this work I've probably been doing it my whole life, adult life, right? So for me, it's like looking at the focus, like what's really important, right? Does this, somebody cut me off in traffic. Am I going to hold that for an hour? Am I going to pull out a BB gun? Like, what am I going to do with that tension and anger that I feel towards other people? And I'm like, I gotta just let it go, right? Because there's this, you never know what can happen in life, like you say. And so what do you want to do? Like, make sure you're doing it. Don't hold out. Don't say it's on my bucket list. Do it. Because I mean, you get one life, live it to the fullest. I know it's the cheesiest saying, but like, grab it by the horns and do what you want to do. And I think too, it's like, if that incites your courage, if that incites your bravery to think, you may only have a month to live and you want to make sure you do what you do, then do it.
Yeah. I try and live by I call it the 5 by 5 rule. So if somebody angers you, right? Someone cuts you off in traffic,
Yeah,
or anything, ask yourself the 5 by 5 rule, and that is, will this thing matter in 5 years? And if it doesn't matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 seconds worrying about it.
I love it. That's great. I have to remember that.
And
Yeah,
it goes back to that, what's really important, you know,
yeah,
um, relationships. You ask yourself about your relationship. Will this be around in 5 years? Well, yeah, probably. Well, then I need to really pour more energy into the decisions that I make around it, right? But if
yeah,
something's not going to be important in 5 years, like there's no use in wasting time and energy and valuable life force on it for more than 5 seconds or 5 minutes.
yeah, yeah. And you also never know what somebody else is going through, right?
Yeah.
And so you may say something that really upsets somebody, but you don't know what happened. Like, I had a dad when I worked at Ronald McDonald House, the dad whose kid had just died, and he said he, hadn't eaten for several days and went to McDonald's to get something, and the person was just really, really, really just evil and mean, and like, he said, you just don't understand to him. You know, I've had a bad day. And the dad just sat there and sat with him for a moment. And he's like, you know what? My child just died, but like, I have no idea. Maybe something really bad in his life happened. So I need to reflect on that and say, maybe something did happen to him that's equally as bad. And I don't need to get upset back at him and give that energy back that way. And I thought, oh my God, that was a super humbling moment in my life to just think, you never know what's gone on in somebody's day that day or the day before, what's coming ahead, and just to give grace to what it is that they're going through. And
Yeah.
don't spend my energy worrying on what they're bouncing back at me.
Yeah, I think giving grace is a huge deal, because sometimes it's not even appropriate to ask someone like, "What's going on with you today?" you know,
Yeah,
or they
yeah,
may not know, or they may not want to give you the answer, but just having grace and just giving them the benefit of the doubt, that, I don't know what your life is like, but I know that life is difficult for all of us, and maybe one of those days is today for you.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, we've talked about some really big and deep existential questions. And like I said, for some people, and probably for some of the listeners out there, when they start to ask these questions, what is my purpose on the planet? What is my purpose in the cosmos? That can be such an overwhelming question that it can almost cause us to avoid it, or
Hmm.
not address it, or not look at it. And so, you brought up another thing that I think is an amazing practice for everybody, and it's something that I try and engage too, because these questions are so big and can be so overwhelming. You mentioned that you get up every morning and you do yoga and you ask, what can I do today for the
Hmm.
world?
Hmm.
And I think that's such a great way to take this big overwhelming question, which is definitely worth exploring, and parse it down to a daily experience or a daily practice.
Hmm.
And asking yourself each day, like, what can I do today to make the world better? What can
Hmm.
I do today to help someone? What can I do today to move towards my goal, instead of thinking about the big picture and what your whole life meaning is supposed to be
Yeah,
about, just
you're
focus on
right.
today, and try and do your best. That's all that anyone ever asks of you.
Yeah, you're right. Bite-sized chunks. Thinking about the bigger picture, if I'd have thought about where I am now, 25 years ago, never, ever, ever would have seen myself here. 6 years ago, probably not even so. Um, and right, it is thinking about also like what brings me joy. Um, and what brings someone else joy? Like, what could I do today that might make someone else smile? Like, just something small like that, right? Yeah, because if I thought about the bigger picture, like, oh, what am I going to do with my whole life and my career? That's too much,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, great point.
Well, I want to say thanks again for your time today and for this chat. It has been amazing, and you've certainly brought a smile to my face today. And I'm sure you're going to bring more and more smiles to some of the listeners who hear this podcast. And who knows? We don't know. Maybe these podcast radio waves will connect with other planets and other beings, and you'll be
Yeah.
spreading smiles all across the universe with this ripple butterfly effect. And
Yeah.
what you do is super important, and I really value your perspectives. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for your mind.
What little's left of it. Thank you, Shane, for letting me be here. This has been so fun to get to see this side of you as well and to engage in some of these dialogues, which I don't get to always do on my day to day basis. It's so fun to sit back and think about the bigger picture of life and my place in the world. And I'll definitely be thinking about my energy and what I'm giving back.
Nice. And you're going camping soon, and I hope to as well. So hopefully you can get up in the mountains and recharge some of your energy,
Yes.
and connect with and vibe with some of the energy of the mountain, which I love. It's so
Yeah.
powerful, so revitalizing, and we gotta learn as well as human beings that we are not here to save the environment, to save nature. We are the environment, and we are nature.
Mhm.
And we have the ability, if we choose to tap into that and connect with nature and the environment in a way that we have not been, because we have been seeing ourselves as separate from nature and separate from the environment, but we're not. That's
Yep.
it's that duality illusion that we're trapped in right now. So I hope you go out there and you are able to
Oh, I
truly
will. You
connect.
know I will. Soak every ounce of it up. Breathe deep. Yes.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jen. I appreciate it. And to you listeners out there, thank you for joining us today. Next episode will be the big 100. So keep on listening. And this has been Conversations with the Mind. Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.